Echoes of the Veil, Episode 6, The Third Mark. They left the dead man behind because the veil did not stop for grief. Stone swallowed his shape one step at a time. The sour smell of half-rotten flesh thinned with distance, replaced by the usual mix of damp rock, mold, and the faint metallic ghost that clung to every breath down here. Echo's palm still ached, a cold pressure radiating from the spiral as if its mark resented being pulled away from its reflection on the corpse's chest. Lira walked ahead by half a pace, enough to see around corners before he did, not enough to call it leaving him. Her shoulders were drawn tight, every muscle carrying more weight than the pack at her back. She hadn't spoken since she'd looked at the other man's mark and said what she said. "We're not the first." The words clung to the inside of Echo's skull like damp cobwebs. They brushed against every thought, coloring it. Every shadow felt a little more crowded. Every echo sounded like it might have belonged to someone else once. "How many?" he asked finally. His voice came out low, roughened by disuse and the stale air. It sounded too loud in the narrow passage, bouncing off the stone and returning to his ears like a stranger's voice. Lira didn't look back. "Enough to leave bones," she said. "That's not a number." "It's the only one that matters." Her boots scraped over a patch of grit. "Thinking about them won't help us walk." He swallowed down the argument that rose anyway. He wanted to know who the others had been, how far they had made it, whether any of them had found a way to live with the mark instead of dying with it carved into their skin. The dead man's twisted spiral would not answer him. The veil almost certainly would, but only in ways that hurt. The corridor bent, then sloped upward. The ceiling lifted a little, no longer pressing against the top of Echo's awareness like a hand waiting to push him down. Cracks laced the rock overhead, some wide enough for the mist to leak through in fine glowing threads that hung like spider silk before dissolving. His hand throbbed again when they came to the next fork. Two paths, one narrow and low, where the air felt thick and still. Another wider, with a faint draft that brought with it the scent of something green, or something that remembered being green once. When he glanced toward the narrower way, the spiral in his palm flared with a tight, needling pain. When he shifted his eyes to the wider tunnel, the pain dulled to a vague pressure. "Wait," he said. Lira stopped with an economy of motion that came from years of not wasting any. Her head turned slightly, enough for him to see the line of her jaw, the smudge of old blood near her ear. "What?" He lifted his hand a little, fingers half curled. "It doesn't like that one." He nodded toward the low passage. "It hurts more when I look at it." Lyra's gaze slid from his palm to the tunnel mouths. She inhaled slowly through her nose, testing the air the way she might test the draw on a bow. "Smells worse that way, heavier, like water that's forgotten how to move." "And the other?" "Wind." She was quiet for a heartbeat. "And something else. Can't taste it yet." Echo shifted his weight, feeling the pull in the healing thigh. The memory of the corpse sat just behind his eyes. A marked man who ran from something and not far enough. "We can't trust it," Lira said, nodding at his hand. "The veil could be tugging through you, hurting us where it wants." "We can't ignore it either," he said. "Not after him." She hated that he was right. I saw it in the way her mouth tightened. "Fine," she said. "We listen. We don't obey. We go where the air doesn't already mourn us." She turned toward the wider tunnel. "Stay close," she added. "If it starts to burn like it did back there, you tell me before you fall over this time." He fell into step beside and slightly behind her. The draft gathered strength as they walked, sliding along the floor and licking at their boots. It carried with it new smells, damp earth, a trace of something woody, and underneath, faint and unsettling, the sharp, sweet rot of old vegetation.
The walls began to change. The raw, fractured stone gave way in places to smoother surfaces, blocks that had once been laid on purpose. Lines of mortar clung between them, cracked but still visible. Here and there, someone or something had scratched over the old order, leaving gouges and spirals that crawled across the worked stone like scars. They stopped once, on a slightly raised ledge, to rest. From here, the tunnel dipped ahead into a darker stretch, the light from above fading until it was little more than a smear. To their right, a break in the wall revealed a narrow shaft plunging into depthless fog. Echo could not see the bottom, only the way the mist churned slowly in the unseen space below, like a sleeping thing that disagreed with the idea of rest. Lira leaned her back against the ledge, sliding down until she sat with one knee drawn up, the other leg extended. She set her knife across her lap, not to sharpen it, but to keep her hands busy, tracing the familiar nicks in the blade. "You kept your feet better," she said after a while. Echo blinked. The comment came out of nowhere, until he realized she was dragging a thread back to the room they'd just left, to the way he had moved around the corpse. "I almost tripped into a crack," he said. "You saw it before your boot vanished in it." She flicked her gaze toward him. "Last week, you wouldn't have." "I might not have been here at all," he said. "Exactly." A dry spark lit her eyes for a moment. "It would have saved me the trouble." He knew her well enough now to hear the lie in the joke. She tapped the stone between them with the tip of her knife. "Tell me," she said, "if something came through that gap," she nodded toward the dark ahead, "where do you stand so it kills you slower instead of faster?" He studied the terrain, the ledge they were on, the drop beside them, the narrowing of the floor tunnel as it descended. "Not at the edge," he said, glancing at the shaft. "If I back up there, I fall. If I go straight down, it crushes me against the wall." "Good." He pointed to a spot slightly offset from the center of the tunnel, where the floor was rougher, and a chunk of fallen stone made a half step of higher ground. "There," he decided. "Use the rock so it has to climb over, not just run." Lyra grunted. "And if it comes from behind?" she pressed. He turned his head, forcing himself to consider the shaft again, the slope, the cramped width. "I move before it does. I don't wait until I feel its breath." "That's new too," she said. He didn't know if she meant the thought or the fact that he was saying it out loud. Most people think of monsters as storms, something that hits them out of nowhere. But they all leave marks. Smell, sound. You learn to see the storm before it breaks, or you become part of the debris. He glanced at her shoulder, at the dark patch spreading slowly through the bandage there. "And you?" he asked. "Always saw them coming?" "Often enough to be annoying, not enough to stay pretty." His eyes flicked to her face before he could stop them. The cuts, the bruises, the crook in her nose that might have been a break once. For a moment he saw her not as the weapon the veil had helped forge, but as someone who had chosen again and again to walk toward danger, instead of curling up somewhere and waiting to be forgotten. She noticed his look, and for once didn't turn it into a joke. "Don't get sentimental. Sentiment makes you stand still. Standing still gets you killed." He let the subject drop. The veil didn't like long, honest conversations. It had too many ears. "Come on," Lyra said, pushing herself up with a small grunt. He rose more carefully, feeling the difference between how he moved now and how he had staggered just after waking in the hollow. The pain was still there, but it no longer felt like the only thing holding him upright. As they descended into the darker stretch of tunnel, the draft grew stronger, threading around them with more insistence. Somewhere ahead, the world was changing again.
The tunnel's walls drew closer, then slowly began to pull apart again. The stone underfoot shifted from rough, broken slabs to something flatter, more deliberate. Echo's boots clicked differently, the sound sharper, less muffled by debris. He glanced down and saw that the floor had become a series of wide, fitted tiles, their edges chipped and cracked, but still clinging to a pattern that had once been precise. Lines ran between them, not mortar this time, but faint grooves, tracing shapes that the veil's thin light only half revealed. Circles overlapping, straight cuts crossing them. Shallow depressions where something had once been set and then pried out or eroded away. This wasn't just built, Lira muttered. It was planned. Like the circle? Echo asked. With the pillars? Different. She dragged her fingertips along the wall as she walked, feeling the transition from natural rock to worked stone. The circle was for breaking things. This feels like it wanted to hold. Hold what? If we're lucky, she said, we'll never find out. The air cooled as they went, but it was a clean cold, not the rotten chill of places that never saw light. The draft became a steady flow, brushing Echo's face, teasing the edges of his hair. His marks settled into a steady, muted throb, as if for once it was content to let the world speak without interrupting. Footsteps, Lira said suddenly. Echo froze. It took him a second to pick them out from the echo of his own heartbeat. A soft, irregular scrape, then a heavier drag, like something with uneven limbs pulling itself forward. Where? He whispered. She tilted her head, listening. Ahead, right side, not big, not small enough to ignore. A ridge had formed where the tiles met a section of collapsed wall, creating a natural choke point, a place where anything moving forward would have to slow or adjust. Lira pointed at it with the tip of her knife. She said, "Lesson 2, we don't wait in the open." They moved quickly but quietly to the side, tucking themselves behind a chunk of stone that jutted out from the wall. From here, Echo could see the tunnel ahead turn gently to the right. The sound grew clearer. Claws against stone, claws against tile, a wet, clogged breathing that made the fine hairs on his arms stand up. "Remember your feet," Lira murmured. "Low, wide, knife close. Don't try to win. Try not to lose." He swallowed and nodded. His throat plicked. The thing came into view a moment later. It sculpted along the right-hand side of the corridor, just as she'd said. Body close to the ground. It had too many joints in its legs, bending in awkward angles that made it seem both ungainly and disturbingly flexible. Patches of skin clung to bones in strips, dried and tight, while other sections were bare, showing yellowed bone glistening with a thin sheen of something dark. Its head was wrong, too long, too flat, as if someone had tried to hammer a skull into a new shape. Shards of what might once have been a mask were fused to its face, crooked pieces of pale material embedded in flesh and bone. Where eyes should have been, two dark pits stared out, deep and glossy, catching the light without reflecting it. Its jaw worked constantly, even when it wasn't growling. Little grinding motions, teeth scraping against one another as if chewing on memory. Echo's hand tightened around the hilt of his knife. The spiral in his palm pulsed, not in fear this time, but with a kind of sharp alertness that made his skin prickle.
Lira leaned in, close enough that he could feel her breath at his ear. "It hunts by sound and smell," she whispered, "not sight. Stone's hard, our blood's old. Don't give it anything fresh to follow." "How do we—" "On my count," she cut him off. "I step out. Make it look at me. You stay left. When it commits, you cut the back leg nearest you. Don't reach for its teeth. You're not ready to die that stupid." His heart hammered harder. He forced himself to nod again. 3, she mouthed, hardly any sound. The creature's head jerked, jaw clenching. It had heard something. 2. It lifted one front limb, placing the twisted paw down with care, claws clicking softly against the tile. 1. Lira moved. She flowed out from behind the stone in a controlled, economical step, sliding into the creature's path instead of leaping. Her blade was already up, held close to her body, not extended. Her weight shifted the way Echo had seen her show him, low, balanced, ready to twist instead of block. "Here," she said. Not a shout, but a sharp, precise sound. The creature snapped toward her instantly. Its jaws gaped, revealing rows of uneven teeth stained dark. It lunged, all those wrong joints straightening at once in a burst of speed. Echo stayed where he was. Everything in him wanted to dash forward or backwards, to either help or flee. He forced himself to remember her words. Don't cross her line. He slid left instead, hugging the curvature of the stone, feeling the roughness scrape his shoulder. Lira pivoted at the last moment. She didn't try to meet the charge head-on. She turned her body just enough that the creature's momentum carried it past the point it wanted. Her knife flicked out, grazing along its side. Not a killing blow, just enough to make it twist, to force it to drag one leg out of rhythm. "Now!" she snapped. Echo moved. His stance wasn't perfect. His thigh burned as he pushed off, but his feet landed where he meant them to. One on solid tile, the other finding the small rise of broken stone for leverage. The creature, stumbling from Lira's cut, exposed the back leg closest to him for a heartbeat longer than it should have. He kept his knife close, just like she drilled into him. No wild swing, no dramatic arc. He stepped in and down, driving the blade into the joint where bone poked under thin flesh. The impact shuddered up his arm. The knife bit shallow at first, then slipped deeper as whatever held the joint together gave way with a wet pop. The creature screamed. It wasn't a roar, not like the monster in the tunnels. It was a high, broken wail that seemed to come from everywhere inside its body at once. The sound made Echo's teeth ache. The limb buckled. The creature crashed sideways, skull slamming into the tiles hard enough to crack one. A spray of dark fluid splattered across the floor, spattering Echo's boots and the hem of his trousers. The smell hit him a second later. Thick, sickly sweet, like meat left in a closed room for too many days. He stumbled back a step instinctively, but this time he didn't fall. His center stayed where he'd put it. Lira was already on it. She moved around to its front, staying clear of the staggering sweeps of its remaining limbs. Its head snapped toward her, jaws gnashing at empty air, trying to bite anything it could reach. She did not give it the chance. 2 quick, brutal steps and she was close enough. Her knife drove in under the ragged edge of one fused mask shard, up through the soft place beneath where its eyes should have been. The creature convulsed once, a violent full-body shudder, and then went slack. Its limbs twitched a few more times, then stilled. For a moment, the only sound in the corridor was their breathing. Echo became aware of his own heartbeat again. It was still racing, but not the wild, frantic pounding of panic, more like the thudding of someone who had just run hard and stopped on purpose. His leg trembled under him. The cut on his thigh throbbed, unhappy with his choice to act, but he was still upright. Lira yanked her knife free, wiping the blade on a patch of the creature's hide that wasn't yet soaked. "You aimed where I told you," she glanced at the ruined back leg. "Didn't stab for its spine like an idiot. That would have bounced and put you in its mouth." "I thought about it," he admitted. "I know." Her lips quirked. "You made a better mistake." He looked down at the dark smear drying on his boots. "It almost threw me," he said. "When it screamed." "Good," she replied. "Now you know what that feels like before the next one does it louder." He let out a shaky breath. "That was smaller," he said, "than the thing in the tunnels." "Everything is smaller than that." That doesn't mean it can't feed on you all the same. She scanned the corridor ahead again, paying more attention to shadows and corners than the corpse at her feet. We don't stay, she decided. Blood's fresh now. Smell will go places we don't want company from. Echo nodded. He wiped his knife on the least filthy part of his own trousers, then sheathed it. His hand brushed his palm. The spiral there had heated during the fight, not with pain, but with awareness. Now it settled again, cooling like metal pulled from a forge and left in air. As they moved on, Lira fell in beside him rather than ahead. It wasn't a declaration. It was a small redistribution of weight in the world. You held the line, she said, eyes on the path. You didn't run. You didn't get under my feet. You heard it. He waited for the insult that usually followed. It didn't come. That's something, she finished. Not enough, he said. Never will be, she agreed. That's why we're not dead yet. The tiles under their boots began to change again, the shallow grooves between them widening, shaping themselves into more deliberate patterns, arcs and spokes radiating from a point up ahead where the tunnel seemed to open. The air grew cooler, but the cold now felt less like the veil's disinterest and more like stepping into a place that had been waiting.
The corridor widened so gradually that Echo almost didn't notice at first. The walls drew back by slow degrees, the ceiling lifting into a shallow arch. The light changed too, thinning from the tight, oppressive gray of tunnels into something more diffused. It bled in through cracks and seams overhead, catching on dust and mist until the air itself seemed to glow faintly. Under their feet, the tiles had organized themselves into a pattern. What had been a scatter of cracked squares became long, curved segments fitted together with unnerving precision. Lines etched into their surfaces no longer ran at random. They flowed, sweeping outward from some center point ahead like ripples frozen mid-spread. In the gaps between them, narrow channels sank a finger's width into the stone, empty now, but hinting that once something had moved along them, water, light, or something else entirely. Lyra slowed. "This is old," she said under her breath. "Older than the circle, older than most of what we've bled on. How can you tell?" Echo asked. She shrugged one shoulder, the uninjured one. "Age has a shape. Things built in fear look different from things built with time. Whoever made this thought they had both." The draft they'd been following broadened into a steady, cool flow. It carried with it a hint of open space, the way air did near the mouths of caverns or the edges of deep wells. Echo's mark lay quiet in his palm. Not dead, not cold, just watchful, like it was waiting to see what he would do next before choosing how to punish him for it. "Stay sharp," Lyra said. "Places like this don't stay empty without a reason." They followed the sweeping lines underfoot around a gentle curve. The tunnel walls fell away entirely, replaced by columns. They rose from the floor in a wide ring, thin at the base and widening as they climbed, like trunks of petrified trees that had learned geometry. Their surfaces were carved with vertical bands of symbols, some spirals like the ones Echo had seen before, but many not. Straight strokes intersected with circles, triangles nested inside each other, curves that never quite closed on themselves, always leaving a gap, a question. Between the columns, the world opened up. They stepped out into a circular space, large enough that Echo's sense of distance faltered. The floor sloped down gently from the ring of columns to a slightly lower center, like a shallow bowl. The tiles here were laid in careful concentric rings, each band inscribed with patterns that shifted subtly from one to the next, as if telling a story in a language that refused to be heard all at once. Above, the ceiling rose into a dome. It had not escaped the veil's teeth entirely. Cracks veined its surface, and one section near the edge had collapsed, leaving a jagged gap where mist streamed in like slow smoke. But most of it still held. The stone of the dome was lighter than the tunnel walls, almost pale and polished smoother. lines etched across it in sweeping arcs, intersecting and diverging, meeting at small nodes where something glimmered faintly. Echo squinted. In some of those nodes, pieces of dark glass or crystal had been set into the stone. Most were dull now, opaque with age, but when the veil's thin light passed over them, they caught and bent it, throwing faint, warped reflections down onto the floor. Tiny, broken constellations shivered on the tiles, moving slowly as the mist above shifted. Sound behaved strangely here. Every step he and Lyra took came back to them softer, as if the dome listened and then decided how much of their noise to send back. The usual far-off roars and rumblings of the veil were muted, pressed to the edges of awareness. Echo's throat tightened. "What is this place?" he whispered. "A question someone built a roof over," Lyra said. Her eyes moved from symbol to symbol, from groove to groove. She turned slowly in a half-circle, taking it in like a hunter learning the lay of an entirely new kind of terrain. No altars, no obvious traps, no piles of bones. That's almost a comfort. "Almost," Echo echoed. As they walked down the gentle slope toward the center, he traced some of the patterns with his gaze. They meant nothing, or maybe they meant everything, and he simply hadn't collected enough pieces yet to see how they fit together. Some bands of symbols seemed to show motion, curved lines repeating, small marks along their paths that reminded him of footprints or ticks on a watch face. Others clustered around stylized shapes, circles divided by straight lines, like eyes shut with scars, long ovals with lines emanating from one side, like something falling or rising. None of it matched the crude warnings and prayers carved in the ruins above. None of it matched the ritual circle where his mark had been burned into him. This was older work, or different work, perhaps both. His spiral lay quiet, listening. "Echo," Lyra said suddenly, voice low. He looked up. At the very heart of the ring, where all the lines of the floor converged, a raised platform waited. It was only a few hands' breadth higher than the tiles around it, a disc of stone with a beveled edge. Symbols ringed its circumference, more deeply carved than those on the floor, inlaid in places with a faint metallic sheen that had somehow survived the veil's long fingers. And on that platform, there was someone standing. For a moment, his mind tried to turn the figure into another statue, another remnant of a forgotten people. The stillness was that complete. The posture was that composed. Then she moved, just enough to shift her weight, and all thoughts of stone dropped away. She was slender rather than slight, wrapped in a long mantle of black that fell in quiet, heavy folds to brush the carved stone at her feet. The hem and edges of the garment were picked out in fine silver thread, the designs echoing some of the shapes on the dome and floor, small circles, short lines that turned at right angles, spirals so minuscule that they seemed almost like stitching mistakes until the eye followed them and found the pattern. Her hands were bare, fingers pale against the dark fabric where they rested lightly at her sides. Her skin was the color of old ivory, not the gray pale of someone the veil was already claiming, but a softness of white that belonged to someone who had not seen much sun even before the world turned to mist. It caught the strange, indirect light from above and reflected it with a subtle, almost luminescent sheen. Her hair fell to just below her shoulders in loose, dark waves, black with the deep, dull shine of onyx. Here and there, a lock had found its own path and curled a little tighter, catching at the silver stitching as if reluctant to let go. No dirt clung to it, no blood. It lay too clean in a place like this. Her face was calm, not blank, not cold. There was softness at the corners of her mouth, a gentleness that had nothing to do with safety. Her lips held a small, quiet smile, the kind someone might wear when greeting an old story rather than a friend. Her eyes caught him.
The irises were blue, but not the clear, bright shade that belonged to shallow water or a freshly washed sky. They were dark, a deep indigo that hovered just this side of black, like ink that had been poured and left to pool. Light settled into them and did not quite come back out in the same shape. Looking at them felt less like being observed and more like standing at the edge of a well at night and realizing that something at the bottom was aware of you. Echo stopped without thinking. His body remembered to shift into the stance Lira had drilled into him, feet apart, center of gravity low, knife hand close to his chest. But his mind stumbled. Lyra's reaction was less visible, but no less complete. One moment she was just walking. The next, she was a blade given legs. Her body angled slightly between Echo and the woman on the platform. Not enough to block his view completely, but enough that she could move into the path of anything that came at them. Her hand settled on the hilt of her knife, fingers loose but ready. Her gaze flicked once around the circumference of the dome, checking corners and columns and shadows for threats before returning to the center. "No one moves that clean in the veil without help," she said under her breath. Echo wasn't sure whether she meant the woman or the dome itself. They stood at the edge of the inner circle now, just outside the band of tiles that framed the raised disc. Up close, the carvings at their feet seemed almost to vibrate with meaning they refused to share. The woman had not called out, had not shifted her stance, had not done anything that could be read as overtly threatening, and yet every instinct in Echo's body screamed that stepping onto that central platform without understanding what it was would be a decision he could never fully undo. His palm tingled. The spiral there had begun to throb again, not with the sharp sting of danger, but with a slow, synchronized pulse that matched something he couldn't quite identify. It took him a heartbeat to realize it was matching the rise and fall of the woman's chest as she breathed. She took a breath. His mark answered. "Echo," Lira said in a tone he had learned meant, "Do not do anything stupid." "I'm not," he said softly. "You're thinking about it?" "Yes," he admitted. The woman on the platform tilted her head, just slightly. That small motion sent a strand of her dark, gently wavy hair sliding along the line of her jaw to rest against the black of her mantle. Her gaze moved from Lira to Echo and back again. Not like someone judging threats, but like someone comparing what she saw to something she had already been told. Up close, Echo could see that she too bore a mark. It was not on her face or her hands or any visible place that the veil usually liked to advertise its claims. It peered from the faint gap at the front of her mantle, just below her throat where the fabric parted enough to allow movement and breath. A spiral. Not quite like his, not like the dead man's either. This one had more loops, tighter and finer, coiling inward before branching into thin filaments that disappeared beneath the edge of the cloth, as if they continued across her skin where he could not see. His hand burned, then cooled, as if caught between reaching and recoiling. Lira narrowed her eyes. "Are you alive?" she asked. It was the most impolite question. It was the only one that mattered. The woman's smile widened by a fraction. Not enough to show teeth, just enough to suggest that the question amused her. "For now," she said. Her voice carried easily in the dome, not loud, but clear, the way a bell sounds when someone knows exactly how hard to strike it. There was a low, resonant quality to it, a hint of something that had been worn smooth by use. It brushed against Echo's ears like cool water. Lyra's grip on her knife tightened. "Good," she said. "That means you can answer questions before something proves us wrong." "Always so sharp," the woman mused. Her eyes lingered on Lyra's stance, on the way she placed herself protectively, without drawing attention to the fact, "And you brought him." It was a simple statement. It made Echo's skin crawl. He swallowed. "You know us," he said.
I know of you, she corrected gently. Knowing you will take longer. If we are blessed with time. The last word tasted different in her mouth. Echo couldn't say how, it just did. Who told you we were coming? The veil? Sometimes. The woman's gaze flicked up, tracing one of the arcs on the dome above, then back down. Sometimes the cracks in it. Sometimes what seeps through. That's not an answer, Lira said. It's the only one I have, she replied, echoing words Lira had used not long before. Something in her expression flickered. Then she set her jaw. You knew we'd find this place. You waited here. For how long? The woman's eyes softened, not with pity, but with the weight of someone used to waiting. Long enough to doubt my own voice. Not long enough to stop hearing it. She looked directly at Echo then. Really looked. He had the unnerving sensation of being read rather than seen, like one of the carvings underfoot, his lines traced by fingers looking for meaning. His fingers curled reflexively, hiding the spiral in his palm from view. It's all right, the woman said quietly. You don't have to show me. The veil already did. The air seemed to thicken. Echo realized he had been holding his breath. He let it out slowly. Who are you? He asked. The woman's small, soft smile returned, as if they had finally reached the part of a story she had been allowed to speak aloud. Names are heavy here, and yours are still settling. She stepped down from the platform, the movement unhurried and oddly graceful given the roughness of the stone. The hem of her black mantle whispered against the carved surface, silver-edged patterns catching the light as she moved. She did not cross the last band of symbols. She stopped just shy of it, leaving the space between them, measured, deliberate. Call me whatever lets your tongue rest. For now, I am only this. Her gaze moved from Lyra's guarded readiness to Echo's wary curiosity, the smile at the corner of her mouth deepening in some private understanding. The one who has been watching for you in the cracks. Lyra's fingers tensed on her knife. You talk like the veil. That's not a compliment. It has a bad habit of borrowing my words, the woman agreed lightly, then more firmly, with a note that landed like a stone at the bottom of a well. But not all of them. She let a breath pass, the dome seeming to join in the pause. Finally, she said, and the word held relief, exhaustion, and a thin thread of something like hope, all braided together. You made it.